Hello, good afternoon, team. Welcome to a Software Technologies YouTube channel. Today's session, we will discuss about Linux and components of the Linux operating system and the boot process of the Linux. First, what is meant by Linux? Linux is a free and open source operating system based on the Unix, and also it relies between hardware and software, allowing the programs to run, manage resources, and communicate with hardware devices. And coming to components of a Linux system, there are several key components are present in Linux operating system. First is kernel. Kernel it is acts as a bridge between hardware and software, and also it will manage system resources like CPU, memory, input and output operations, etc. And also it will manages the process scheduling and memory management and device drivers like CG drivers, etc. and system calls. And next is system libraries. These are special programs used by application to interact with kernel. Example, we have the common system library we see in Linux is glibc. Example, and next is system utils. System utils, these are essential tools and commands used to manage systems. Example like ls command, cp command, mv command, ps command, top and kill, chmod and df, du, etc. commands. These commands I will show the command execution in command line in the next sections. And next is shell. Shell it is acts as an interface between users and kernel. User user type commands which the shell interprets and sends to kernel. Types of the shells as bash shell and yeah, most common used shells are bash shell. And coming to next, we have hardware layers. Hardware layer having the two types like physical components like CPU, RAM, like HSD and SSD, network cards, etc. And entirely by the kernel through device drivers. This is about Linux and its components. Now we will discuss Linux boot process. There are several stages in boot process. First stage it is like BIOS. BIOS full form is basic input and output systems, initializes hardware, and also it loads the bootloaders like grip grub, we have the bootloader like grip grub from mbr. It is like master boot record. Next is it is bootloader stage using grep. The grep locates and loads the Linux kernel and initializes the RAM disk into memory. And also it passes control to kernel with parameters. Example, root file system path. Next is it is like kernel initialization. Once the bootloader loads the kernel, here, once the bootloader loads the kernel, there are several steps it will take place. Decompression and setup. Like VM Linux is a compressed kernel image. It decomposes itself in memory and kernel sets up protected mode like memory management and hardware obstructions. And init rd, and next step it is like init rd executions. It is like temporary root file system loaded into ram, and also the kernel mounts into rmfs and executes init inside the shell script or binary. Next step, it is like starting init process. The kernel executes the first user space the process using init. This is the parent for all user space process. Next, system the process responsibilities like the mounting of essential file systems like proc, sys and dev, and also it starts networking, crons, etc. And next step it is like kernel process management. Kernel process management have several internal process, usually kernel threads. Like kernel threads manager and handles the soft IR queues and manages background work queues, handle the memory spacing and read, copy, update, synchronization. Yeah, we can see this process everything using the top and PS command and PS command in command line. Yeah, this is about the Linux and its components and the boot processing steps. If you have any doubts, please contact my WhatsApp number. Thanks for the joining.